Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Clem Merrow's truck rattled down the gravel drive, dust kicking up behind the worn tires like a brown cloud following him toward the farmhouse. A year. It had been a whole damn year since he'd seen his daughter, and that fact sat in his chest like a stone. The farmhouse ahead looked the same, white paint peeling around the edges like old skin, porch sagging on one side where the foundation had settled, but something felt wrong. The air itself seemed different, heavier somehow, like the moments before a thunderstorm when even the birds go quiet. He couldn't put his finger on it yet, but 40 years of construction work had taught him to trust his instincts about structures that weren't sound. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel like anchors. 59 years old, and his knuckles were already swollen with arthritis from decades of sheet metal work, each joint a testament to the thousands of hours he'd spent bending steel to his will. The cuts and burns on his fingers told the story of every job he'd taken to keep food on the table after his wife died, the factory work, the overtime shifts, the weekend projects that paid cash under the table. All of it to make sure Avon had what she needed for college, for her wedding, for the life he'd wanted to give her. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd worked himself half to death to provide for his daughter, only to watch her disappear into a marriage that seemed to be slowly killing her spirit. The front door opened before he reached the porch steps. "Daddy!" Avon rushed toward him, but her smile looked painted on. Too bright, too quick. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he caught the slight wince when he hugged her back. "Hey, baby girl." His voice came out rougher than intended. She pulled away fast, stepping back toward the house. That's when he saw it. The faint yellow-green mark under her left cheekbone, mostly hidden by makeup, but not quite enough. "Come on in." Grady's inside. Ramona made coffee. Clem followed her through the front door, his work boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The house smelled like cleaning products and something else fear. Maybe he'd learned to recognize that smell during his tours in Vietnam. The sharp scent of adrenaline and suppressed panic that hung in the air when people were living under constant threat. It was the same smell that clung to bunkers after mortar attacks, when everyone was waiting for the next round to fall. The living room was immaculate, every surface polished to a shine, every magazine perfectly aligned on the coffee table. It was the kind of cleanliness that came from obsession rather than comfort, the desperate tidiness of someone who knew they'd be punished for any imperfection. Grady Bryce stood in the living room, all 6 feet of him filling up the space like he owned everything in it, which, according to the law, he probably did. The man had that easy smile coaches used on parents and school boards, the practice charm that had probably gotten him out of trouble his whole life. But his eyes stayed cold, flat, and calculating like a shark's. He wore khakis and a polo shirt with the school logo, every inch the respectable educator and community leader. "Clem, good to see you, old man." Grady stepped forward with his hand out, the movement aggressive in its friendliness. Clem shook it once, quick and firm, noting how Grady's grip lingered a moment too long, testing for weakness. No warmth in it, just the dominance display of a man who needed to win every interaction. "Grady, how's the sheet metal business? Still bending steel for a living?" The question carried a subtle condescension, the tone of someone talking down to manual labor. "Still paying the bills." Good. Honest work, even if it's not for everyone." Grady's smile never wavered, but the insult was clear. Ramona Bryce emerged from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand like a weapon she was considering using. 70-something years old and sharp as a blade, with gray hair pulled back tight enough to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades controlling every aspect of her environment, including the people in it. She looked at Clem like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe, an unwelcome intrusion into her perfectly ordered world. "Clem, what brings you by?" Her voice carried the kind of false politeness that Southern women use like a knife, sweet on the surface but cutting underneath. "Visiting my daughter. Last I checked, that was still allowed." He kept his tone level, but the message was clear. He wasn't intimidated by her disapproval that Ramona's mouth tightened into a thin line, the kind of expression that had probably terrorized Sunday school children for decades. Of course, family is important. The words came out like she was chewing on something bitter. Avon busied herself, straightening magazines on the coffee table, her movements quick and nervous, like a bird that knew it was being watched by predators. Each motion was careful, practiced, the behavior of someone who'd learned that any mistake would be noticed and punished. "Sit down, Daddy. I'll get you some coffee." Her voice was soft, almost whispered, as if speaking too loudly might trigger something unpleasant. As Avon headed toward the kitchen, Clem noticed how she moved careful, like everything hurt, like she was walking on broken glass. When she turned to ask how he wanted his coffee, he saw the bruise again, clearer this time. The makeup couldn't quite hide the way the bone structure of her cheek looked slightly swollen, or the way she unconsciously favored that side of her face. "She's always knocking into stuff," Grady said, following Clem's gaze with the practiced ease of someone who'd told this lie many times before. His tone was casual, almost amused, like they were discussing a clumsy pet. "Can't keep her balance. Just yesterday, she walked right into the bathroom door. Isn't that right, honey?" The endearment dripped with false affection, a mockery of intimacy that made Clem's skin crawl. Avon froze by the kitchen doorway. Her hand went to her cheek automatically before she caught herself. "I'm clumsy sometimes." The words came out flat, rehearsed. Clem had heard enough lies in his lifetime to recognize one. "Maybe you should get that looked at," he said. "Oh, it's nothing. Really." Ramona settled into her chair with a sniff. "Some people just aren't built for keeping house. Takes a certain kind of woman to manage a proper home." Avon's shoulders tightened, but she disappeared into the kitchen without a word. Clem watched her go, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "She tries her best," Grady said, lounging back on the couch like he was holding court. "But you know how women can be. Emotional. Scattered. Good thing she has us to keep her grounded." Clem didn't trust himself to speak. He'd built a career around controlling his temper, measuring twice and cutting once. But sitting in this room, watching his daughter flinch and smile and apologize for existing, it took everything he had not to reach across that coffee table and wrap his hand around Grady's throat. Avon returned with coffee in a chipped mug. Her hand shook slightly as she set it down. "Thank you, baby girl." They made small talk for another 20 minutes. Grady talked about his basketball team, how they were heading to regionals. Ramona complained about the neighbor's dog. Avon said almost nothing, just sat with her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting for permission to speak. When Clem finally stood to leave, Avon walked him to the truck. "It was good to see you, Daddy." She hugged him again, tighter this time. Her face pressed against his shoulder, and he felt her slip something into his jacket pocket. Quick and smooth, like they'd practiced it. "Take care of yourself," he said into her hair. "I will." But when she pulled back, her eyes were wet. Clem drove 3 miles down the road before he pulled over. His hands shook as he reached into his pocket and unfolded the small piece of paper. 4 words in his daughter's careful handwriting. "Help me, Daddy." He sat there for a long time, staring at those 4 words until they blurred. Then he folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, right behind the picture of his dead wife. This was going to be a war. Clem didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold hours ago, staring at the note spread out under the circle of yellow light from the old lamp his wife had bought at a yard sale 20 years before. For words that changed everything, written in the careful handwriting he remembered from birthday cards and school essays. The kitchen around him was sparse, functional, a working man's space with mismatched furniture and appliances that had seen better decades. But it was honest, unlike the perfect facade of the farmhouse where his daughter was trapped. Every piece of furniture here had been earned with sweat and overtime, bought with money that represented real work and real sacrifice. WY morning, he had a plan. Not the kind of plan that involved fists or threats. He'd learned enough about small-town politics during his 40 years in this county to know that wouldn't work. Men like Grady had protection, connections that ran deep through the community like roots through soil. The Bryce family had roots in this county going back 4 generations. Grady coached half the town's kids, attended the right church, served on the right committees. Ramona served on the church board and the hospital auxiliary. had her fingers in every social organization that mattered. They had connections, reputation, money. But Clem had something they didn't understand. He had time, patience, and 40 years of experience fixing things that seemed impossible to fix. In his line of work, you learned that the most complicated problems usually had simple solutions. You just had to be smart enough to find them and stubborn enough to see them through. His first stop was the hospital. Carla Boone worked the day shift in the emergency room, had for the past 15 years. She and Avon grew up together, thick as thieves until Avon married Grady and stopped coming around. Back in high school, they'd been inseparable, staying up all night talking about boys and dreams and all the places they'd go when they finally escaped their small town. Carla was divorced now, lived alone with 2 cats in a duplex near the hospital, and had never liked the Bryce family much to begin with. Something about the way they carried themselves, like they owned the air other people breathe. Clem found her in the break room, eating a sandwich that looked like it came from a vending machine. The fluorescent lights made everything look sickly, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite cover the underlying scent of human suffering that permeated every corner of the hospital. Clem Marrow. Been a while. She looked up from her sandwich, surprised but not unwelcoming. Carla. He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the table. His fingers were stained with metal shavings and motor oil, the permanent marks of a man who worked with his hands. I need to ask you something. About Avon. Carla's expression shifted, became more guarded. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize the look of a father who suspected the worst about his daughter's situation. What about her? How many times has she been in here? The ER. You know I can't. She started the automatic response, the one they trained into all medical personnel about patient privacy. I'm her father. Carla stared at him for a long moment, weighing her legal obligations against her moral ones. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of hospital activity, monitors beeping, intercoms crackling, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors. Finally, she set down her sandwich and leaned forward. Officially, I can't tell you anything. Patient privacy laws exist for good reasons, and I could lose my job. She paused, glancing around the empty break room. Unofficially? Too many times. Always the same story. Fell down the stairs, walked into a door, slipped in the shower. Classic accident-prone wife, if you believe that kind of thing. Do you? I've been a nurse for 20 years, Clem. I've seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns. The injuries, the excuses, the way they flinch when someone moves too fast. She shook her head, anger creeping into her voice. I know the difference between an accident and someone using another person as a punching bag. What kind of injuries? Carla hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The kind that don't show when she's dressed for church on Sunday morning. Bruised ribs that she claims came from falling off a ladder. Sprained wrists that allegedly happened when she tripped over the dog. That split lip last month that needed 3 stitches said she bit it when she sneezed too hard. Her voice carried the bitter frustration of someone who'd seen too much and been able to do too little. Always somewhere that won't embarrass the family name or interfere with Grady's coaching career. Clem felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest, but he kept his voice level. Anyone else know about this? Dr. Patel's suspects. So do most of the nurses. But suspecting and proving are different things. And Grady Bryce. Carla shrugged. He's got a lot of friends in this town. What would it take to prove it? Evidence. Documentation. Someone willing to go on record. She met his eyes. Someone willing to risk making enemies with very powerful people. Clem nodded and stood. Thank you. Clem. Carla's voice stopped him at the door. If you're thinking about helping her, be careful. Men like Grady don't give up their toys easily. His next stop was Lyle Greer's law office, tucked between a hardware store and a diner on Main Street. The building was old, with narrow windows and floors that creaked under his weight. Lyle sat behind a desk covered in papers, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Clem, wasn't expecting to see you. Need some legal advice. Lyle gestured to the chair across from his desk. They'd worked together 5 years ago when Clem's neighbor tried to claim part of his property. Lyle was quiet, methodical, and had a reputation for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. He was also divorced, which meant he understood what it felt like when the system failed to protect people who needed it most. What kind of advice? Hypothetical situation. Woman wants to leave her husband. Abusive situation. What are her options? I'll set down his glasses and lean back in his chair. Depends on a lot of factors. Does she have her own income? Assets? Children? No children. No income. Everything's in his name. Everything. House. Car. Bank accounts. Phone plan. Everything. Lyle whistled low. That's financial abuse on top of whatever else is happening. Makes it a lot harder to leave. He paused. We talking about anyone specific? Like I said, hypothetical. Right. Well, didn't believe him, but he didn't push. Hypothetically, a woman in that situation would need evidence of abuse. Police reports, medical records, witness statements. She'd also need somewhere safe to go and a way to support herself. What about a restraining order? Hard to get without documented evidence. And even then, Lyle shrugged. Piece of paper doesn't stop a determined man. What about divorce? She need to file in family court. But without assets or income, she'd be looking at legal aid or pro bono representation. Could take months or years to resolve, especially if he fights it. Clem absorbed this information, filing it away. Hypothetically, what would you charge to handle something like that? For the right case? The right client? Well, met his eyes. I might be willing to work something out. They understood each other. Clem's last stop was Donna Yates. He found her at home, a small house on the edge of town with a garden that looked like something from a magazine. Donna worked for Child Protective Services, but she and Clem had history that went back 10 years. Her daughter Emma had been 16 when the spring floods hit. The girl was driving home from work when her car got swept off the road into Miller's Creek. Clem happened to be driving by, saw the headlights under the water, and pulled her out before she drowned. Emma was in college now, studying to be a teacher. Donna never forgot who saved her daughter's life. Clem, what brings you by? She led him to the front porch, where they sat in wicker chairs overlooking her garden. The evening air was thick with the smell of roses and honeysuckle. I need some information about domestic violence cases. Donna's smile faded. This about someone we know? Maybe. She was quiet for a moment, watching a hummingbird at her feeder. I can't discuss active cases. I'm not asking about active cases. I'm asking about what it takes to build one. Documentation, evidence, medical records, police reports, witness statements. And the victim has to be willing to cooperate. She turned to look at him. That's usually the hardest part. Women in abusive relationships often protect their abusers. What about financial abuse? Harder to prove, but just as devastating. When someone controls every dollar, every credit card, every bank account, it's like being in prison without bars. How long does it take to build a case? Depends on how careful the abuser is. Smart ones don't leave marks. They don't hit where it shows. They control through fear and isolation instead of violence. She paused, but they all make mistakes eventually. They all get overconfident. Clem nodded, storing this information with the rest. Clem, Donna's voice was gentle but firm. If this is about what I think it's about, be very, very careful. And make sure she wants help before you try to give it. Sometimes trying to rescue someone who isn't ready just makes things worse. He drove home as the sun set, painting the Tennessee hills red and gold. His phone buzzed once a text from an unknown number. They check everything. I'm not allowed to have friends. He said if I ever leave, he'll ruin you. Clem stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, let him try. Now listen carefully. 3 days later, Clem drove past the farmhouse just as the sun was setting, painting the Tennessee hills in shades of red and gold. He didn't plan to stop, just wanted to see the place, get a feel for their routine, maybe catch a glimpse of how they lived when they thought no one was watching. But what he saw made him pull over and kill the engine, his blood pressure spiking like he'd just run a marathon. Avon was in the front yard, bent over picking up pieces of trash that had blown across the lawn from God knows where. Even from 50 yards away, he could see the careful way she moved, like every motion sent pain shooting through her body. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm evening, and her movements were those of someone who'd learned to protect injured ribs. Ramona stood on the front porch like a prison guard, her voice carrying across the evening air with the clarity of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. That's not good enough. Look at this yard. Looks like a tornado hit it. You call this clean? The old woman's voice was sharp enough to cut glass, each word designed to wound. What will the neighbors think if they drive by and see this mess? Avon straightened up slowly, her arms full of paper scraps and leaves. Even her posture spoke of defeat, shoulders rounded with the weight of constant criticism. I got most of it. Most isn't all. And now you need to rake it again. The whole thing. Can't have the neighbors thinking we don't maintain our property. Ramona's voice dripped with the kind of contempt usually reserved for something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. I just raked it yesterday. The words came out quiet, defeated, but there was still a trace of Avon's old spirit in them. Are you arguing with me? The question came out sharp as a blade, with the kind of dangerous edge that promised consequences. The words hit Avon like a physical blow. Her shoulders sagged, and what little fight had been in her voice died completely. No, ma'am. I'll rake it again. See that you do. And when you're done with that, the gutters need cleaning. Should have been done weeks ago. A proper wife maintains her home. Each word was calculated to diminish, to remind Avon of her failures and shortcomings. Clem sat in his truck, hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, watching his daughter being ordered around like a servant. The old woman's voice dripped with contempt, every word designed to cut and diminish. His phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number as before. Can you see me? He looked up. Avon was facing away from the house, toward the road. She couldn't see his truck from where she stood, but somehow she knew he was there. He texted back. I see you. I can't talk long. They'll notice. Clem watched Ramona disappear into the house, then reappear at the front window like she was keeping watch. What do you need? Time. I'm trying to keep track of things, but it's hard. They watch everything. The phone I gave you. Hidden, but I can only use it when they're asleep or gone. Clem thought about this. The flip phone was an old one from his truck, nothing fancy, but it worked. He'd given it to her the day before, slipped it to her when she hugged him goodbye after their coffee meeting at the diner. Can you document things? Write them down. Maybe. There's a loose vent cover in the bedroom. I could hide things there. Do it. Write down dates, times, what happened. Everything. What if they find it? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. A long pause. Then, Daddy, I'm scared. The words hit him like a physical blow. His daughter, his strong, smart daughter who used to climb trees and catch fireflies and never back down from anything, was scared. I know, baby girl, but we're going to fix this. How? One step at a time. Trust me. He watched her put the phone away and go back to picking up trash. Ramona appeared on the porch again, pointing at something else that needed fixing. Clem started his truck and drove away before he did something stupid. But he was already planning his next move. The war had begun. 2 weeks later, Clem had assembled his army of allies, each person chosen for their specific skills and their willingness to go to war against the Bryce family's carefully constructed facade. Carla agreed to document every injury, every suspicious visit to the ER. She'd been keeping informal notes for months. She told him dates, times, injuries, and the increasingly implausible explanations that accompanied them. Now she'd make them official, creating a paper trail that even the most skeptical judge would have to acknowledge, while started building the legal framework for a divorce case that could actually succeed. He researched Tennessee law on spousal abuse, financial control, and restraining orders, mapping out the complex terrain of family court like a general planning a campaign. The process would be complex, requiring careful timing and overwhelming evidence, but it was doable if they were smart about it. Donna provided guidance on how to build a protective services case, even without children involved. Domestic violence was domestic violence, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every variation of human cruelty. The state had an interest in protecting vulnerable adults too, and there were legal mechanisms in place to help women escape abusive situations if you knew how to navigate the system. But the most important part of his army was Avon herself, and she was proving stronger than any of them had expected. She'd started keeping a journal, hidden behind the loose vent cover in the bedroom she shared with Grady. Every incident, every cruel word, every threat. The entries were short but detailed. March 3rd, G angry about dinner being late. Push me into kitchen counter. Ramona laughed and said I deserved it for not planning better. March 5th, G took my car keys. Said I don't need to go anywhere without him. When I asked about grocery shopping, he said Ramona can drive me like a child. March 8th, Ramona called me a worthless breeder at breakfast. G nodded and said at least I was good for something, even if I can't do that right either. The journal was damning, but they needed more than words on a page. They needed proof. That's when Clem decided to take a risk. He showed up at the farmhouse on a Saturday afternoon, carrying a small gift bag. Grady answered the door with his usual fake smile. Clem, wasn't expecting you. Brought Avon something. Little housewarming gift. Grady's eyes narrowed slightly, but he stepped aside. She's in the living room. Avon looked up when he entered, and he saw the relief in her eyes. She was sitting in a chair by the window, folding laundry with mechanical precision. Hey, Daddy. Hey, baby girl. Brought you something. He handed her the gift bag. Inside was a decorative bookend shaped like an owl, the kind of thing you'd find at any home goods store. Avon lifted it out, running her fingers over the carved wood. It's beautiful. Thank you. Thought it might look nice on that shelf there. He pointed to the bookshelf that faced the main seating area. Good spot for it. Avon placed the bookend on the shelf, exactly where he'd indicated. What she didn't know, what no one knew except Clem, was that the owl contained a tiny wireless camera, smaller than a dime, and powered by a battery that would last for weeks. Very nice, Ramona said from the kitchen doorway. Her tone suggested she thought it was anything but nice. Though I'm not sure we need more clutter. It's not clutter, Avon said quietly. It's a gift from my father. Everything in this house is clutter if it doesn't serve a purpose, Grady said, settling onto the couch directly in the camera's line of sight. But I suppose we can find room for one more useless decoration. Clem visited for an hour, making small talk and watching Grady and Ramona perform their version of a loving family. But he could see the tension underneath, the way Avon jumped when Grady raised his voice, the way Ramona's comments cut at her stepdaughter like small knives. When he left, the owl stayed behind, watching everything. Meanwhile, Avon had started collecting audio recordings on the flip phone. The device was old but functional, and its long battery life meant she could leave it recording for hours at a time. She hid it in different places around the house, behind books, under cushions, in kitchen drawers, capturing conversations when Grady and Ramona thought they were alone. The recordings were revealing. Ramona's voice, sharp and cruel. She's useless, Grady. Can't cook, can't clean, can't even give you children. Why do you keep her around? Grady's response, casual and cold. Because she's mine. I pay for this house. I pay for her food and clothes. I own what's in it, including her. You could do better. Maybe. But breaking her was too much fun. Besides, where's she going to go? She's got nothing without me. No money, no job, no friends. I made sure of that. Another recording from later that week. Ramona again. Your father never would have tolerated this kind of disrespect. A woman needs to know her place. She's learning. Slowly, but she's learning. Not fast enough. Maybe you need to be firmer with her. Oh, I'm plenty firm when I need to be. The sound of laughter, cold and calculating. Each recording was another nail in their coffin, but Clem knew they needed more. They needed something undeniable, something that would shock even the most skeptical judge or jury. They got on a Tuesday evening in late March. Avon had prepared dinner pot roast with vegetables, one of Grady's favorites. But the roast was slightly overcooked, the vegetables a little too soft. Not bad, just not perfect. Grady took one bite and threw his fork down. This is garbage. I'm sorry. I can make something else. What did I tell you about apologizing? His voice was rising, and Avon shrank back in her chair. You don't apologize. You fix the problem. I don't understand what you want me to. The slap came fast and hard, rocking Avon's head to the side. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. That's what you do, Grady said, his voice deadly calm. You shut your mouth and you listen. Ramona clapped slowly from her seat at the head of the table. Finally, that's what she gets when she disobeys a man. Should have done that months ago. Avon sat frozen, her hand pressed to her cheek, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't make a sound. The owl bookend watched it all, recording every second in high definition. Avon waited until midnight to retrieve the hidden camera's memory card. Her hand shook as she copied the file to the flip phone, then uploaded it to the secure email account Clem had set up for her. The next morning, Clem, Lyle, and Carla sat in Lyle's office watching the video. The slap was clear and unmistakable. Ramona's encouragement was even worse. "This is it," Lyle said quietly. "This is what we need." Carla had already filed her mandatory domestic violence report with the hospital administration and the police. The medical records she'd been keeping documenting every suspicious injury, every implausible explanation were attached as supporting evidence. Donna received her copy of the video that same afternoon. By the end of the day, she'd opened a formal protective services investigation, but they had to move fast. If Grady suspected they were building a case, he might escalate the violence or try to isolate Avon even further. Lyle spent the next day drafting papers, a petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences in spousal abuse, a motion for a protective order, and a request for emergency spousal support. The evidence package included the video, the audio recordings, Avon's journal entries, and Carla's medical documentation. They filed everything on Thursday morning. The process server arrived at the farmhouse that afternoon while Grady was at basketball practice. Ramona answered the door, her face going white as she read the restraining order. "What is this?" "Legal documents, ma'am. I need to serve these to Grady Bryce as well." "He's not here. I'll wait." When Grady's truck pulled into the driveway an hour later, the process server was sitting on the front porch. Grady took one look at the papers, and his face turned dark red. "What the hell is this?" "Divorce petition and restraining order, sir. You need to read them carefully. There are court dates involved." Grady scanned the documents, his hands shaking with rage. "Where is she?" "Sir, according to this restraining order, you're not allowed to contact." "Where's my wife?" But Avon was already gone. While the papers were being served, she was at the police station with Clem and Lyle, filing additional reports and arranging for a police escort to collect her personal belongings. She moved into Clem's small farmhouse that evening, carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases. Grady tried to control the narrative from the start. He called his lawyer, a slick corporate attorney who specialized in protecting wealthy families from embarrassment. He told anyone who would listen that Avon was mentally unstable, that she'd made everything up to get money in a divorce. "She's always been emotional," he told a local newspaper reporter who called for comment. "Unstable. I've been trying to get her help for months, but she refused treatment." But Clem had anticipated this response. The day after the restraining orders were served, the video of Grady slapping Avon appeared on the local news. A civil rights attorney from Nashville, a friend of Lyle's, had leaked it to 3 different stations simultaneously. The footage was damning. Clear, high-definition evidence of a grown man striking his wife while his mother encouraged the violence. There was no way to spin it, no way to explain it away. The story went viral within hours. WY evening, news vans were parked outside the farmhouse. Grady's basketball team suspended him pending investigation. The school board called an emergency meeting. But the real bombshell came when investigators started digging into the family's finances. Ramona had been stealing from Avon for years. The old woman had forged Avon's signature on inheritance documents, redirecting money from Avon's dead grandmother into accounts controlled by the Bryce family. Bank records showed a pattern of theft going back to the day Avon married Grady. The district attorney reviewed the evidence and filed charges: domestic battery, financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Grady was arrested at the school, handcuffed in front of his players and fellow coaches. Ramona was arrested at the farmhouse, screaming about family loyalty as they put her in the patrol car. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page: beloved coach and mother charged in domestic abuse case. But the real victory came when Clem saw the community's response. Former players spoke up about Grady's controlling behavior, his explosive temper during games. Parents recalled uncomfortable interactions with both Grady and Ramona. Teachers talked about the way Avon had isolated herself after her marriage, how she'd stopped attending school events and community functions. The perfect family facade crumbled completely. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November, with frost covering the courthouse steps and a wind that cut through winter coats like they were made of paper. The courthouse was packed reporters with their cameras and notepads, community members who'd followed the story in the local paper, former students and players who wanted to see how their beloved coach's story would end. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, the kind of energy that builds around small-town scandals that shatter carefully maintained illusions. Clem sat in the second row behind the prosecutor's table. Wearing the only suit, he owned a dark blue one he'd bought for his wife's funeral and hadn't worn since. Avon sat beside him in a simple gray dress, her hands folded in her lap, looking calmer than she had in years. The months of preparation had given her something back, not innocence, which was gone forever, but a quiet strength that reminded him of her mother. Lyle had spent months preparing for this moment. He'd organized the evidence into a compelling narrative that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse and control. The prosecution's case was built like a house, each piece of evidence a foundation stone supporting the next level of proof. The prosecution presented their case first, methodically building their argument piece by piece. The video evidence was played for the jury, Grady striking Avon, Ramona applauding the violence like it was a performance she'd been waiting years to see. Several jurors visibly flinched when the sound of the slap echoed through the courtroom, and one older woman pressed her hand to her mouth in shock. Carla testified about the medical records, the suspicious injuries, the pattern of accidents that were anything but accidental. In 20 years as a nurse, she said, her voice steady and clear, I've never seen someone so accident-prone who wasn't actually being hurt by someone else. Donna testified about the psychological aspects of domestic abuse, explaining how financial control could be just as devastating as physical violence. When someone controls every dollar, every decision, every connection to the outside world, she said, they don't need to use violence every day. The threat is always there. But the most powerful testimony came from Avon herself. She took the stand wearing a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup to hide the faint scars that remained from years of accidents. When Lyle asked her to describe her marriage, she spoke in a calm, clear voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. He told me I was worthless on our wedding night, she said. Said I was lucky he'd married me, because no one else would want me. It got worse from there. She read from her journal, describing incident after incident of abuse, control, and degradation. The jury listened in stunned silence. When Grady's lawyer cross-examined her, he tried to break her composure. Isn't it true that you've always been emotionally unstable? No. Isn't it true that you made all of this up to get money in a divorce? No. Then why didn't you leave sooner? Avon looked directly at the jury. Because he convinced me I had nowhere to go. No money, no job, no friends. He was right about most of that until my father helped me realize I was worth saving. The defense's case was weak. Grady's lawyer tried to paint him as a dedicated coach and community leader who'd made a single mistake in a moment of stress. But the evidence was overwhelming. When Grady himself took the stand, he stuck to the script his lawyer had prepared. Avon was mentally unstable. The video showed an isolated incident taken out of context. He'd been trying to help her for years, but Lyle's cross-examination destroyed him. Mr. Bryce, you testified that your wife was mentally unstable. Is that correct? Yes. Then why did you hide her financial information from her? Why was her name removed from bank accounts, credit cards, even the title to her own car? I was protecting her. She wasn't capable of handling money. But according to her employment records, she managed the books for a small business for 3 years before you married her. No problems, no complaints. What changed? Grady fumbled for an answer. Marriage changes people. Or did you change her circumstances? Lyle held up a stack of documents. Bank records show that within 6 months of your marriage, every account with her name on it was closed or transferred to your sole control. Her car title was changed. Her credit cards were canceled. Even her cell phone plan was transferred to your name. That's not protecting someone, Mr. Bryce. That's controlling them. I was her husband. It was my responsibility. Your responsibility to isolate her from every source of independence. That's not what I did. Then explain this. Lyle played one of the audio recordings, Grady's voice saying, I own what's in it, including her. The jury's faces hardened. Those words were taken out of context, Grady said, but his confidence was shaken. What context makes it acceptable to refer to your wife as property you own? Grady couldn't answer. When Ramona took the stand, she was defiant. Yes, she disciplined her daughter-in-law. Yes, she managed the family finances. Yes, she'd encouraged her son to be firm with his wife. A woman needs to know her place, she said, glaring at the prosecutor. Modern women don't understand respect. Is respect what you call stealing $23,000 from inheritance money that belonged to your daughter-in-law? That money was family money. She was family, but you didn't tell her about the inheritance, did you? You forged her signature and deposited the money into accounts she couldn't access. I was protecting the family's interests. Whose interests? Because it seems like you were protecting your own interests at her expense. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Grady was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Ramona received 18 months and a felony fraud conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life. As the sentences were read, Clem watched his daughter's face. No tears, no celebration, just a quiet strength that reminded him of her mother. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Avon ignored them all, walking to Clem's truck with her head held high. "How do you feel?" one reporter called out. Avon stopped and turned back. "I feel free." The civil case was easier. With criminal convictions in hand, Lyle filed for restitution and asset recovery. The court awarded Avon the farmhouse, both vehicles, and full access to all accounts that had once been in her name. She could have kept the house. It was worth nearly $200,000, fully paid off, with good land and a solid foundation. But she didn't want it. Too many bad memories, she told Clem as they stood in the empty living room. "I need something that's mine from the start." She sold the house within a month and used the money to buy a small building on Main Street, 3 blocks from Lyle's office. The previous owner had run a flower shop, but the space was perfect for what Avon had in mind. She turned it into a ceramic studio. Not just any studio, a place specifically for women recovering from domestic trauma. She partnered with Carla, who left the hospital, to help run support groups and provide medical advocacy for women trying to escape abusive relationships. They called it Second Chances Studio. The grand opening was on a warm Saturday in May, with spring flowers blooming in the planters Carla had arranged along the sidewalk. Half the town showed up, including many of the people who'd testified at the trial, former students who'd found the courage to speak about Grady's temper, parents who'd witnessed his controlling behavior, teachers who'd watched Avon disappear into isolation after a marriage. There were also people Clem didn't recognize, women who'd driven from neighboring towns, drawn by news coverage of the studio's mission. Some looked nervous, uncertain, like they were testing the waters of possibility. Others carried themselves with the quiet confidence of survivors who'd found their way through the darkness and wanted to help others do the same. Avon wore a simple yellow dress that brought out the gold in her hair, and her smile looked genuine for the first time in years. She moved through the crowd with easy confidence, explaining the studio's programs, showing off the pottery wheels and kilns, describing the support groups that would meet in the back room. "I wanted to create something beautiful," she told the small crowd gathered in front of the studio. Her voice carried clearly across the street, stronger than it had been in years. A place where women can remember what it feels like to build instead of having things torn down. Where they can take something formless and shape it into whatever they choose. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. Clay and lives both could be reshaped, given new purpose, turned into something beautiful despite being broken. Clem watched from the back of the crowd, proud but not surprised. His daughter had always been strong, she'd just forgotten for a while. But strength wasn't something you lost permanently. It was something that could be buried, suppressed, beaten down, but never truly destroyed. Like metal under pressure, it might bend, but with the right conditions, it could spring back stronger than before. The next week, he showed up at the studio with a truck full of lumber and tools. "What's all this?" Avon asked. "Building you a bench for the courtyard." The courtyard was a small space behind the studio, planted with flowers that Carla had donated. Avon had talked about putting a seating area back there, a quiet place where women could sit and think. Clem spent 3 days building the bench. It was simple but solid cedar planks on an iron frame, built to last for decades. When he was finished, he carved words into the back slat, letters deep enough to read from across the courtyard. "You don't break my blood." It was something his own father had said to him once, during the worst of his drinking years after Vietnam. A reminder that family bonds were stronger than whatever tried to destroy them. Avon found him installing the bench on a Wednesday evening, working by the light of the studio's back porch. She read the inscription and started crying the first tears he'd seen from her since the trial ended. "Daddy, your mother would be proud," he said, not looking up from his work. "Of both of us." 6 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. Avon found it in her mailbox at the studio, mixed in with bills and promotional flyers from art supply companies. Her name and address written in handwriting she recognized immediately, even though she hadn't seen it in over a year. The return address confirmed what she already knew in her gut: Grady. Writing from the state penitentiary. The envelope was thick, multiple pages of what looked like desperate rambling, the kind of manipulation disguised as remorse that she'd learned to recognize during their marriage. Her hands didn't shake as she held it. That surprised her. A year ago, just seeing his handwriting would have sent her into a panic attack. Now she felt nothing but a cold emptiness, the same feeling she imagined surgeons had when they cut away diseased tissue. She walked to the small fireplace in the studio's main room, the one she and Clem had installed for the comfort of women who needed warmth during their darkest moments. The fire was already burning. She kept it going most days now, a symbol of life and renewal that seemed to help her clients feel safe. Without hesitation, she threw the letter in, unopened. The flames caught the paper immediately, turning Grady's words into smoke and ash before they could poison her mind with whatever lies or threats or false apologies he'd written. She watched until every piece was consumed, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: complete indifference to his attempts to control her. Clem arrived just as the flames were dying down, carrying a bag of groceries he'd picked up for her on his way over. He'd been doing that more often lately, small gestures of care that helped fill the gaps left by years of isolation. What was that? He set the groceries on the counter and joined her by the fireplace. "Letter from Grady. From prison. You didn't read it?" "Didn't need to." She stirred the ashes with a poker, making sure every piece was burned completely. "I know it would say. Either threats or apologies, and I don't want either one. No curiosity. None." The word came out flat, final. Whatever he had to say, I already heard it during 3 years of marriage. He's got nothing new to offer. They stood watching the fire finish its work, the studio quiet around them except for the soft crackling of burning wood. Classes didn't start until evening, and Carlo was at a doctor's appointment, so they had the place to themselves. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, highlighting the pottery on display and the pictures on the wall showing women who'd found their strength again before and after, photos that told stories of transformation more powerful than any words could capture. "Someone asked me yesterday if I'd ever forgive him," Avon said finally, her voice thoughtful but steady. "What did you tell them?" "That forgiveness is something you give to people who made a mistake, not monsters." She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and determined. He knew exactly what he was doing every time he hit me, every time he isolated me from my friends, every time he made me feel worthless. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice he made over and over again. Clem nodded, understanding completely. "Your mother used to say something like that. Some people deserve second chances. Others just deserve consequences. Do you think I'm too hard? Not forgiving?" The question came out quietly, with just a trace of the old uncertainty that used to plague her. But there was strength underneath it now, the confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment. "I think you're exactly as hard as you need to be," Clem said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who tried to destroy you. It's something you give when you're ready, if you're ever ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay too." They left the studio together as the sun was setting, walking to Clem's truck parked on Main Street. The town was settling into evening porch lights flickering on like fireflies, families gathering for dinner, the comfortable rhythm of a community that had weathered its share of storms and come out stronger. The last year had changed things in ways both small and large. People spoke differently about domestic violence now, with less shame and more understanding. The high school had implemented new training for coaches about recognizing signs of abuse. The hospital had updated its protocols for documenting suspicious injuries. Small changes, but important ones. Some people still whispered about the Bryce family scandal, but the whispers had shifted from skepticism to support. More women had come forward with their own stories of controlling relationships and emotional abuse. The courage of one had given permission to many others to speak their truth. "Daddy," Avon's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yeah, thank you for not giving up on me. Never crossed my mind." The words came out gruff, but the emotion behind them was clear. Even when I couldn't ask for help out loud, especially then. He turned to look at her, seeing his wife's strength in her steady gaze. Sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who can't say it directly. But that doesn't mean they're not asking. Avon smiled the same smile she'd had as a little girl, before the world taught her to be afraid, before she learned that love could be a weapon instead of a gift. "I love you too." As they drove toward home, Clem thought about the note that had started everything, for simple words on a scrap of paper. "Help me, Daddy." She'd asked him silently, and he'd heard her anyway. Sometimes that was how families worked, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the quiet understanding that some bonds couldn't be broken, no matter what tried to destroy them. Love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just showing up, paying attention, and being willing to fight battles that others couldn't fight for themselves. The war was over. They'd won. But more than that, they'd proven something important. That broken things could be repaired, that lost people could be found, and that the right kind of love, patient, persistent, and uncompromising, could overcome even the darkest circumstances. Justice had been served. Healing had begun. And somewhere in the space between revenge and redemption, a family had found its way back to each other.